Hey guys, so welcome to another episode of the Leverage Your Podcast show. And I have actually probably one of the first people I've ever podcast with, guested or had on my show. Jessica Rhodes of Interview Connections, a podcast booking agency. Honestly, the first booking agency I think that existed, like back in 2013. It's back in the day. So we're going to talk about how to really monetize and get leads from podcasting because it feels like such an elusive thing sometimes. So welcome to the show.
Lindsay, this is so exciting. Your listeners need to understand there's so much history
Yeah.
happening. Like Lindsay is literally like my first business friend. When I started my business in 2013, my dad was my first client. I was his virtual assistant. And, he made some introductions so I could get around the virtual office. And he's like, this is Lindsay. She's a virtual assistant too. And so we were pals
Yeah.
way back in the
And I
day.
was still new then, like
Yeah.
I think maybe a year more than you, like not much.
That's true. Yeah, we were both newbies, and then in 2014 I interviewed you on my podcast, and that was one of my most popular episodes, all about starting a virtual assistant business. So,
Yeah.
and that Facebook memory just came up the
Oh
other
my God,
day,
are
and
you
I'm like, "Well,
serious?
this is so yeah, yeah." It was like a video I did back then, and talking about how you were my most popular episode, and here we are,
Yeah.
10 years
So
later.
funny. I hate when those old videos prop up though. I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking?
They're humbling, but it shows
They
how
are.
far we've come and
I
how much we've
know.
grown.
Exactly. So let's dive into your podcast booking agency and how you help people. When did you pivot to that business?
Gosh, interviewconnections.com came up live on the internet in fall 2013.
Yeah.
So, really, it was just 6 months of being a virtual assistant, with
11
guest booking
years.
being one of the services I was providing. But yeah, interviewconnections.com launched that website and that agency service in September of 2013. So we've been going now for
Yeah.
11 years.
Woo.
And yeah, really specialize in helping people monetize. I know you and I
Yeah.
were just chatting in the green room about how so many, there's over 3 million podcasts now. So many people are like doing podcasting and getting on podcasts, but they're like, this doesn't really work. And they don't realize there's a strategy
I
to it.
know. So true. And I feel like yeah, they think that just because they get on a show that they're going to get this flood of leads and then they get disenchanted and
Mhm.
then frustrated and then bow out. I hear that all the time. So let's dive into the strategy of being a podcast guest. It's more than just having a one sheet and pitching yourself.
Yeah.
So before you even think about podcast guesting, like what are those things you got to get ready as a foundation?
Yeah. I know you've done episodes on, pitching and getting booked and things like that. So I want to kind of jump to like the clarity in your message, because
Mm-hmm.
so many people, when they say like, oh, it didn't work for me, or I didn't get leads, I didn't get clients, there is a lack of responsibility in what you said and how you said it on the show that either attracted leads to you or had the listener saying, not for me. So if you're not getting leads from podcast guesting, it's not that podcast guesting doesn't work. It's that your interview did not compel the listeners to reach out. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this episode, is like,
Yeah.
how do you actually motivate listeners to say, I want more?
Amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny. They think, oh, it's the wrong podcast, or yeah, the whole strategy is wrong. It's like, no.
Yeah.
And with everything, right? It's like when you're a podcast host, how do you get sponsors? How do you get listeners? How do you get rankings? Like there's all these strategies and companies that help you grow your podcast. You got to look at the other side of the mic and realize that there's strategy involved there.
Yeah.
So, what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes that podcast guests make, like
Yeah.
in the episode, in their talks?
So, number one, one of the biggest mistakes they make is that there's no intention or strategy around what they're being interviewed about.
Mhm.
So maybe that means there was no one sheet to begin with. You know, the podcast one sheet is what tells the host, here's what you can ask me. Here are the questions I like to be asked. Here's the questions that will make this interview really, really great. So there's no strategy there. Or maybe there is a one sheet, but you just kind of threw some general topics on there that you could talk about. But you want to take that one step further and really think about your ideal client. Who is your potential client that you want to have reach out to you, and what do they need to learn in the episode with you that's going to have them say move from, like, you know, picture a spectrum 0 to 10. 10 is they're buying from you, 0 is they don't know who you are and what you do. You want in that episode for them to move closer to that 10. What do they need to learn? How do they need to feel in the episode listening? That because people buy when they feel like
Mm.
yes, they feel the yes, they feel the solution coming. And so, what are you saying? What stories are you sharing? What are you teaching? How are you delivering it so that they're moving closer to that 10 out of 10 I want to buy from this person?
Wholeheartedly. And it almost feels like sometimes the guests are just hoping and wishing that the
Mhm.
host will, guide the conversation in a way that they want.
Yeah.
And I've been on shows, that totally go sideways, and I end up talking about things that I don't want to talk about. And I'm like, okay, I need to fix this.
Absolutely. I mean, you as a guest are co-creating the episode. And that's another
Yes.
mistake guests make is they think because I'm a guest, I'm just going to sit there and like let the host lead me. The host isn't leading you. They're co-creating the episode with you. And when you think about it like that, you are playing an active role in making an episode that people are going to love. Like I didn't just show up to this being like, all right, Lindsay, like what do you want to ask me? It's like, no, we were in the green room. Like, what should we talk about? We could talk
Mhm.
about this. Like, okay, what other episodes have you done? You know, topics on what topics have you done episodes on? And when you co create, it becomes a more interesting conversation to listen to because you can tell the guest is actively engaged. Like, I can tell listening to a podcast if the guest is just sitting there, like answering questions. And I can tell when they're really engaged and like co creating the show.
Agreed. And I feel like when the guest is talking about something that they know really well and they're passionate about, you can just see it. They're like animated and excited. And that's when all the good stuff comes out.
Yeah, 100%. If you are being interviewed about topics that you're just not passionate about and that don't excite you, people are going to they're going to feel that. I mean, this is like a strategic marketing tactic, but there's also a lot of energy involved in it because people are listening, they can hear your tone of voice, they can hear how relaxed you are, how excited you are, and when you're like not feeling it, people don't want to spend more time with you.
No,
Like they can
let's
feel
be
the
blunt.
energy.
Yes.
Like it's I remember I was coaching a client a few years ago and she was kind of like questioning like is this working? Like are the shows big enough? Like all of this like blah, 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 like just kind of like negative like questioning it and I was like listen like nobody wants like you're repelling your leads. She's like, well, I'm not saying this. I'm like, yeah, but they feel it. Like just because you're not saying it
Yeah.
publicly doesn't mean that that energy isn't being felt. So if you're feeling and like not excited, even if you're saying the right words, like there's a misalignment. If what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're saying is all in alignment, that's when leads are
Yes.
flowing in.
Agreed. And I love when guests are on my show and they have like a method to share or their system, or obviously they have a book or whatever it is, because I know I'm going to get like 5 tips or certain points that I can then use and leverage. And sometimes I'll listen to episodes and I'm like, the person is like a different podcast and the people are just kind of like rambling. Like there's no clear thought.
Yeah.
Like you just need that clarity. You're so dead on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like now that like, do you want to talk a little bit about the call to action?
Hell
Because I
yeah.
mean, yeah, let's do it.
It's so
So
important.
like, you know, when you have a great interview and you are, you know, you're giving great information, you're sharing stories, you're creating that emotional connection, like you do a great interview. If you don't give a call to action that actually tells the listeners what to do, then your amazing interview is just that's where it's going to stay. It's
It's
listeners are just
entertainment.
going to stay. It's entertainment. Yeah, exactly. And so your call to action, the way I like to say it is it's the lever that you pull to guide the listeners on an intentional journey towards working with you. And when you think about it like that, it makes it much easier to decide what your call to action should be. Because some people are like, lead magnet, I'll just make up a lead magnet and start bringing people to my email list. But I always like to ask, well, how do clients find you now? What are like all of your clients that you're working with now? How do they come to work with you? Well, they all just find me and book a call. Well, then why are we going to start email marketing if you don't do any email marketing? Like, you don't need to create something new.
Yeah.
You need to use podcast guesting as a way to optimize what you're already doing really well.
Mhm.
So if you do really great discovery sessions and strategy calls, then podcast guesting is a way for you to get more people booking discovery sessions and strategy calls. So your call to action should be free. You're not
Yeah.
pitching a paid service at the end of a podcast. It should be free. It should be really valuable. Like, they need to see that whether or not they buy from you, they're going to get value from taking this step. And it should be that logical next step toward eventually working with you. So, what does your sales funnel look like? What steps do your leads take until they buy from you? Well, your call to action as a podcast guest should be something on that, something in that sales funnel. So whether it's a discovery call, or if you do email marketing and you have a lead magnet, it could be your lead magnet, like a quiz or a template or a free report. Some people, they really want to grow their social media or get more people connecting with them on LinkedIn because they're really effective on LinkedIn. Well, then just tell people to connect with you on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. So there's not a one size fits all, but it has
Agreed.
to make sense for your business and optimize what you're already doing really well.
That's so true. And I like how you said that it's not one size fits all, because what works for one business is going to be a little bit different for another. And sometimes you have to do the testing. I had a client, and I was leveraging her content, but she tried doing the discovery call as the call to actions, and she wasn't getting any. And then she changed it to lead magnets, and then she was starting to get leads, nurture, warm them up. So it's just, testing and looking at the data is definitely important. Can we dive into that part? What advice do
Yes.
you give on like what to track?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then just one more thing
Yeah.
there, because I like how your client, tested the call and then went to a lead magnet. What that reminded me of is knowing what your typical sales cycle is. Like, how long do
Mm,
people usually need to be in touch with you before they buy? So for some people, they have a very short sales cycle. Like, people hear them and they book a call and they buy right away. But for other businesses, they know that their leads tend to need to be connected with them for a long time. So asking people to book a call when you know they're probably not going to buy right away
yeah.
may miss the mark. So if you know you have a long sales cycle, then getting people onto an email list, might be the right fit.
Yeah. That's a great take. One more question for you.
Mhm.
So I've also heard a different approach where it's one page, but there's three offers on the page. And that page is specifically for like those podcast listeners. I'm like, I don't know about that strategy, but apparently it works for some. But what's your take?
I like it. I mean, if it were, it's all about testing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you create a landing page with those three options and you're testing it, ideally you're heat mapping it, you're seeing what people are
Mhm.
doing, then go for it. But if you just kind of throw together a page and there's no strategy, there's no way to optimize the conversion, you might be missing the mark there. But I like that with podcasting and podcast guesting, for every rule, there's somebody that's breaking it and still doing a great
Yeah,
job.
that's so
Like, I
true.
have a client that tells people to, like, I have this client who attributes, like, he's like, I'm the $1 million podcast guest. I got 9 figures from podcast guesting. He's got investors in his company. Like, he's crushing it. And he goes, I said, what's your call to action? He goes, I just tell people to Google me and they'll find me. Like,
That's so random.
okay. But it's working for him. And
Okay.
so it just goes to show that whatever you're doing, you need to be in alignment with it. You need to
Mm,
believe that it's going to work.
yeah, so true.
Yeah.
We got a little sidetracked. What were you going to talk about?
We were going to talk about metrics. So you asked
Yes,
about,
thank
kind
you.
of metrics. I mean, I think when you are, this is a tricky one because with marketing and with testing, you do want to track metrics, but there's also a balance because if you get
Mhm.
too, like, if you start micromanaging the metrics too much, you might be disheartened, because with podcast guesting, it's not like every show is going to deliver you an even number of leads. Like, you're going
Totally.
to have some shows that like you get a client from it and it was a huge ROI, and other shows where you get nothing, and some shows where you get a huge spike in people from the email list. So it's like podcast guesting is sort of like up and down. Like sometimes you get a really big spike and everyone in that audience, and sometimes you're on a show where nobody converts, but there's still value in doing a lot of different shows. And I think that's the other piece of monetizing, is it's all about consistency
Mhm.
and not quitting too soon, because so many people quit, quote, 3 feet from gold. They try it for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and they're like,
I
it
know.
didn't work. But by the time they quit, most of their interviews had never even gone live. People
Right?
haven't fully listened. Like they quit too soon. And so, yes, track the metrics. If you're getting calls booked, if you're driving people to a landing page, like what are the right metrics for you to track? But I think it's ultimately about fully committed, really being as good of a guest as you can, listening back, like really valuing excellence, because this strategy works. It works when you commit to
100%.
it. It works. And so be careful not to track too many metrics too
Yes.
closely too soon, because you might convince yourself to quit when it was about to pop off.
I know. And I almost feel like it's such a narrow field of view when they're like, okay, how is my e-list growing? How many leads do I have? Where it's like there's also like your authority, your visibility, your credibility. Is it opening up doors for other opportunities? Is it content you can use? The relationship with the host. It's like there's so many layers that you can't just pick one tiny thing and measure it by that.
Yeah, I have a client. His name is Mike Maynard. He runs a high 7-figure marketing and PR firm in the UK. And so he's closing 6-figure contracts. He doesn't have like a low ticket course. So for him, he's not seeing listeners of the podcast reach out, book a call, and sign up. But he continues to renew with us and continues to invest in podcast guesting, because his business development manager looks at their overall growth, and their SEO is really
Mhm.
strong because of podcast guesting, because of all the interviews Mike does, all these backlinks out there online from the podcast, all the interviews going on YouTube and then YouTube videos. So they have a lot more inbound traffic from leads because of podcast guesting. So there's also indirect ways to see an ROI that aren't just listeners reaching out and becoming a client.
Absolutely. And it's funny, like I find a lot of people in the podcast guesting and even other booking agents, they don't talk about that part. I'm like, I don't know
No,
why.
People, they don't realize, because I think SEO, it is a more advanced strategy. Like when a lot of like coaches and entrepreneurs in their first few years of business, or maybe they just have not gotten to the point where they're investing in a digital agency that's going to do the SEO, the website conversion, all
Mm,
this stuff. So I think it's one of those things that's out of sight, out of mind. They just haven't gotten there yet. But it's so important, because when
yeah,
you do have good SEO, when you do have a lot of people linking back to your website, you dominate Google. And when people are looking for what you do, you want to be found. If you're not being found, you're not being found. And
I
that's a tough
know.
place to be.
Absolutely. And when you have that kind of presence and someone does find you and they see that you're everywhere and you're an expert on all of these shows, it's just that instant credibility and trust that's going to like shorten that sales cycle.
100%. That credibility. I mean, even if people don't listen to any of the interviews you do, the fact that you get interviewed consistently as a guest on podcasts that are targeted podcasts in your niche, it will send a message that you're a credible expert. Because
Yeah.
all of these podcast hosts can't be wrong. If there's dozens of podcast hosts who all want to have you
Yeah.
on their show, that must say something. That means something.
Agreed. Absolutely. Um, so we've talked about what kind of shows you should be on, your talk, the monetization, tracking, leads,
Yeah.
the funnels. Yeah. What else have we not covered?
Honestly, like that, those are the main points, I think. And we've already said this, but the last piece is consistency
Yeah.
and commitment to growth, and doing a really great job listening back to interviews that you've done, which is hard for some people to listen to their own voice, but you do
Oh
get
man.
better when you're committed to being a really great guest. Like you'll listen back and, oh my gosh, I said that crutch word 10 different times. I'm going to do better next time. So commitment to excellence, commitment to the strategy long term, that's really it. And oftentimes we want there to be more to it. We're like, no, but it must be more complicated. And it's like, no, you actually just need to go do it. You
Yes.
actually need to just take action and do it.
I
and keep
know.
doing it and keep growing and keep, keep taking action.
Absolutely. So, what should you do as a guest once the episode is live that'll help you leverage it a little bit further?
Yeah. I mean, share about it, post about it, talk about it. Like being a podcast guest gets my creative juices flowing. Like out of every interview that I do, I've got an idea for an email that I can write and send. And I can
Yeah.
say, oh, I was just on this podcast with Lindsay and we talked all about this. And then I write a whole email to my list. I write a post. I share the interview when it goes live and I link to it and I create clips and video clips and things like that. So really leveraging the content, posting about it. If you have got like a press page on your website, you can put it there, but like really maximize this content, stay in touch with the host. I mean,
Mhm.
there's so many different things that you can do to really repurpose and leverage the content. So the more you put into this strategy, the more you get out of it.
Agreed. Absolutely. So, what would you tell a person that is looking to guest? What is the first thing that they should do?
I mean, I think the first thing you should do is like, how are you going to get booked? Right? There's different ways to do it. You can do it yourself. Like in business, you either have time or money. Like,
Yes.
so if you have no money, but you got a lot of time, you need to start pitching and booking. I know there's episodes of your show that can teach them how to do this on their own. Like just start taking action, getting yourself booked. If you don't have a lot of time, but you want to get booked, then you've got to work with somebody that's going to actually book you. And, we've been
Yeah.
doing this a really long time. So you
Mhm.
can, of course, reach out to us and we can pitch and book you. Interviewconnections.com is our website. But take action. Like if you want to get booked on a podcast, you just need to move forward and get yourself booked.
Agreed. So, one of the pieces of the puzzle, too, I find is like, and I've been talking to some clients, I'm like, oh, what kind of shows are you even guesting on? And I'll give an example. So she's in sales, but she's on a lot of sales podcasts. And I sort of felt like, maybe she's being lost in the sea of sales. And so she's not being able to stand out. So obviously, you're the booking expert, you book guests on different shows. What is the right approach of what kinds of shows to be on that will get you those leads?
Such a great question because it's not just this is my expertise, so I need to be on shows about my expertise.
Mhm.
There's a balance, but I always want to know who's your target audience. Who is your ideal client? Is your ideal client listening to sales podcasts?
Mhm.
If so, then yes, go be on sales podcasts. But it's also not all or nothing. Like I guess on a lot of shows for entrepreneurs, for coaches, for business owners. This is a show about podcasting. I love being on shows as well that are very meta and like all about my industry, because that's great for thought leadership. So there's, be on podcasts that speak to your target audience and that get you visibility to your potential clients. And then also be on podcasts that are in your industry to build up your thought leadership and your credibility within the peers in your space.
Yeah, that's great. And it is funny how they're just like, "Oh, I'm gonna be on these," and then that's it. And for you, your approach about let's try some different lanes, if you will, for different reasons.
Mhm.
I think then too, doing that, you will learn, oh, these are working for me in this way, these are not working for me. And then at least you have that chance to pivot or do more of what's working.
Exactly. And you probably have, different types of ideal clients. Like
Yeah.
I'm on a show next week for, entrepreneurs in real estate because we actually love working with real estate investors and
Oh,
real estate
nice.
investor coaches. I'm on a show today this afternoon after this, for coaches. And so it's just you want to be on different types of shows
Yeah.
to get visibility because that ultimately it may open up a new category or a new type of client that you hadn't considered before. I have a client who, typically works with women. She's an empowerment coach, and she was on a show for, it was mostly like a male audience, kind of like a fitness show, but she had a ton, like she had so many people join her email list after that show. She thought something was
Wow.
broken. She's like, wait a second, what happened? She literally thought something was broken because she had like hundreds of people join her email list after the show went live. And she's like, oh, wow, okay, maybe there are actually men that would like to
Interesting.
work with me. So you never know.
Yeah. I love that. Like welcome surprises.
Exactly.
I know. What's the craziest story you've had from a client?
Craziest story. I mean, crazy bad, I probably black those out of my memory,
Yeah,
to be
yeah. No, I
honest
meant
with
crazy
you.
good.
I mean, I've had like I mean, it's one of the case studies on our website, but it's so memorable. One of the hosts that interviewed our client was organizing an event at YouTube headquarters and invited him to be a
Hmm.
speaker because he did such a great job. And I love stories like that because it just shows the power of the host relationship. And he initially didn't want to do that interview because the
Hmm.
host also has an agency and he's like, that's a competitor.
Mm.
But we said, oh, it's still a really great show. And so just being open to abundance and knowing that there's really no competition. Everyone has
Yes.
different kind of niches and styles. So yeah, those are like kind of crazy fun stories when like one host connection leads to like so many
Yeah,
different opportunities.
I know. That's so cool. And I feel like it's funny. I don't know about you, but when I started my podcast and guesting on podcasts, I was just like leads and email lists. Like that's an exposure. That's all I thought. But the more that I did it, I was like, oh, the connections, the relationships, collaborating, referrals, other
hmm
connections, introductions. It's like, honestly, I've been more into that part and not even like looking at the leads because it was just so fruitful.
So it's so true. And I said this to somebody this morning I had a consult with, and he's like, yeah, I mean, leads and sales are great, but that's not my primary goal. And I'm like, that's actually perfect when it's not your primary goal. That's usually when you do get the leads and sales because you're more
Yeah.
focused on the relationships and having fun and just getting overall brand awareness and exposure. Because when you don't need something, when there isn't an attachment to a result,
Right.
usually the result flows in more free, like in a more flowing way. So yeah, just being open to like all the possibilities creates possibilities that you didn't even know that you
Yeah.
could go for.
I know.
Like, I'll tell you
Absolutely.
actually a crazy story that just came to mind. I have a
Okay.
client that's she's a nutrition coach, and so her business is still like a side hustle. She has a full-time job, and like the CEO of the company that she works in had been listening to her on podcasts. And then when they made the connection, like she didn't realize that she worked in her company because, big company and everything. And so then she like called her in for a meeting. She's like, I might be getting a promotion because I'm out here on podcast.
What?
So that's super cool. So you
That's
never know who's
hilarious.
listening. So yeah, that was a pretty crazy story.
That is a riot. You mentioned goals,
hmm
and how do you how does your goal affect the strategy that you use so that you can monetize the episodes more?
Yeah, I mean, knowing what your goal is going to determine who the audience is that you need to speak to, what are the types of shows, what do you need to talk about to those people, what types of shows would have that topic on their show. So your goal is really the first thing that you need to get clarity on because that will affect every other decision that needs to be made in the process of getting booked and doing the interviews. So for example, if somebody like sometimes we have clients that say, "My only goal is SEO. Get me on
Hmm.
shows where the domain authority of the podcast website is really high because
Oh,
all I want
wow.
is the backlinks." And so they'll go on any show. Like it doesn't even matter. They're like, I could talk about pickleball. I could talk about my business. Like it doesn't matter. They
Interesting.
just want the SEO of the backlink. We don't have a lot of people like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but
That's
I
interesting.
always love when that happens because it's
Yeah,
like, oh my God, like, well, this is fun. What else do you want to talk about? So yeah, knowing what your goal is going to determine everything else. So that's really, really important.
for sure. How many talks do you feel like you should have prepared, like different topics?
I mean, 4 to 6, I think is good
Four to
because you want it.
six.
Yeah, like 4 to 6 interview topics and then 4 to 6 questions that are, verbatim what the host could ask.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be less, like it could be 3, but you want to have at least a small handful, as an option for
Agreed.
the host. And you also want it to fit on one sheet. Some people have like a 2 pager. I'm like, no, it's a podcast one sheet, not a podcast two sheet.
Details, details.
You can put that all on your press page. You can have
I
an
know.
extension, but the one sheet needs to be one sheet.
Mine's too.
Every
You
rule,
hate
there's
me
somebody that's
now.
breaking it. No, because you're just breaking it, but you're still doing great. There's
There you
there's
go.
no one size fits all. I'll still say my rules, but I'm totally okay with people breaking them.
Sweet deal. So for your company, what would you say is your sweet spot? Is there a certain type of guest or client that you look for?
Yeah. So, I mean, we do work with clients like across revenue ranges, across industries. So, of course, I'll say like who our dream client is, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean if you're not that, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't
Totally.
have a dream working with you. But, for us, like six-figure coaches are just such a sweet spot because, once you're at that low to mid six-figure revenue, like you're at the point where you're ready to invest and you really want to
Mhm.
take things to the next level. When you're lower than that, it's like you got more time than money. And so it's difficult to sometimes make that long-term brand building
Yeah.
investment. But that six-figure coach that's got a really solid business, they're really honed in on who they love to work with. So there's clarity across the board. They know what their goals are, they know who their target audience is. They've put together some solid systems to convert
Mhm.
leads. Like that's really great too, because there could be a client that's like like we love them and we love their topic, but if they're kind of a mess on the back end, it can kind of be difficult to see them
Totally.
convert sales. So yeah, six-figure coaches,
Yeah.
we love, high ticket sales. When you're selling a multi-thousand-dollar program, it's easier to make an ROI on
Yeah.
a high ticket agency service than somebody trying to close a lot of $100 product sales.
Very true. And I think you make a good point when someone is at that six-figure level, they do have that clarity of what their offer is, who they're serving, what their funnel is, what their talks are. And I think when you're out of the gate with that foundation, I think the ability to be successful in that arena are so much higher.
Yeah, totally. And like also just the comfort to do something long
Yeah.
term when you don't need, like when someone says to me, how fast will I get an ROI? Because if I'm not seeing a return on my monthly payment plan right away, then I don't know if I can continue paying. And I'm like, with a marketing investment, you need to sign up knowing that I can afford this, whether or not the ROI comes in right away. Because, girl, you're going to sign a contract with me. So,
Yes. Right? Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I know you can't bail out after 3 months. It just
right.
doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've loved chatting with you and catching up, and need to do this again. I want to do some panel discussions. I think that would be super cool to do.
Yeah. This was
Um,
awesome. Thank you so
yeah.
much.
So how do people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, well, if you're interested in like really diving more into the strategy, we gave like this episode was perfect for like kind of the really overview. I do a free masterclass. It's a 3-day, 3-part masterclass, interviewconnections.com/live masterclass. If you're listening to this episode, like right as it comes out, the next one is going to be in August, but we do them almost every month. So
Perfect.
interviewconnections.com/live masterclass where you can register. If you're just ready to get booked, you can of course just go to interviewconnections.com to book a consult. See, I'm
Okay.
breaking my rule and giving 2 CTAs, but
Oh, no, I
okay.
think it's good because there's
Yeah,
different people at different levels,
exactly.
and it'll all be in the show notes. And they were easy URLs to remember. You're good. See, I have 2 pages. You have 2 call to actions. We're fine.
Yeah, exactly. But you got to just be in alignment. So you can
Yes.
either register for the masterclass or book a call. I would love to support
Yeah.
you.
Awesome. Well, so good seeing you again. And I appreciate all your insights to help people leverage more, get more leads, get more clients from podcast guesting, and just understand the strategy that's behind it.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay. This was so fun.
All right, folks. So we will see you next week on the Leverage Your Podcast Show.